Well, let's see. It is 6 p.m. on good morning, good afternoon, I guess. I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, it is 6 o'clock, 6:02 actually, on July 30th, 2019. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of ITSE 2309. And as we're getting pretty close to wrapping it up here, couple of things to do here. We are going tonight. I have changed the order of things, and the course modules. You will note that I have reordered the last three of the topics, and so module 12 is selected topics using database views. And that was down at 14, but I've reordered them. It doesn't really matter. By the way, test 2 is open. Let's see. Cancel that. Test 2 is, when do I have it due? Okay, I have it due on August 3rd. At essentially that's midnight, so that will be on Saturday. So it is due Saturday at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before midnight. Cancel that. I have a URL here, and I will send this out to you in an announcement. Here it is with a line feed in it such that it doesn't wrap. This one I broke it right after the S and brought it down so that you can see what it is. This URL I'm going to be referring to because it talks about the creating views. So what we're talking about today is creating views, and a view is essentially an SQL select statement. So a view is a select statement. It is a select statement that is saved in the database as a table. It acts like a table. It looks like a table. It, in fact, is a table, but what it really is, it's a SQL statement that runs underneath it and creates the table every time that it is selected. Now, when you create anything, we should check and see if it already exists. So I'm creating something called Fresno view here. Strawberry view, huh? Fresno view is not null, then drop the view Fresno view. Okay, whenever we're creating anything, particularly when we're creating a view, the go is required. So go must be before it, the first thing before it, and should be the first thing after it, although SQL Server will let you get away without it right afterwards. Has to be the first thing in the batch. Sometimes people will create them like this: create view Fresno view as, and sometimes they will say select everything from vendors where the city is Fresno, and I put and the state is CA, California. You'll see it that way, but normally when I do it, I will list all of the fields because sometimes I rename them. Since the vendor city is always Fresno. Okay, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. Is somebody trying to talk? Okay, I'm gonna mute. Okay. Well, I say I'm going to. Sometimes there's really no reason I need to have vendor city and vendor state in the view because they've always got to be California and Fresno. So maybe I have maybe included. I have them included in this one. So I'm creating the view. The view's name is Fresno View. And where the vendor city is Fresno and the state is California. And then at the end, the last thing is a go. So you should be bracketed. Anytime you see this word create, that means that you should have a go immediately before it and a go immediately after it, including creating tables. Although sometimes it will let you get away without it, it won't always. It's a little inconsistent there. So since I have these guys there, I'm going to run this down to here, execute, and notice it's happy. Everything went well. So this view exists, and if I were to go over to my Object Explorer, I would find it under Views. Down here's Views, it's right there. I have Tables. Under Tables, I have Views, and I'll have several of them. Fresno View is right there, and I have a couple more that I've created. So Fresno View is there, and it exists. And if I were to say select from it, can I select stuff from Fresno View? Indeed I can. It's just like any other table, except everything in the table is Fresno, California. There's nothing there that isn't. Now the question is it a table? Can it be updated? Okay, what do you think? Do you think a view can be updated? Well, I'm telling you it's a table. A table can be updated, and I'm going to tell you that it can be updated given that certain things are true about it. So given that, and I'm going to show you these things in this URL. Remember that URL up there. I'm going to go to this URL and show you what has to be true. So I can insert into Fresno View. If I insert these values, basically it's just test, 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 test. Will it be inserted? Execute, and notice it inserted it. Now the interesting thing here is that the state is XX and the city is named TEST. So this record will not appear in the view. So that's an important point that I'm going to talk about later. And the rest of this stuff is just test data. Okay. Can I update it? Well, let's see. Update Fresno View. What do I have where vendor ID is 16? And let me go over to my view. I'm going to go back to the Object Explorer and go to the tables. Let's see. This is the vendors table is underneath it. So I'm going to edit it. And let's look at 16. 16 is the Internal Revenue Service. So I'm going to change the name of the Internal Revenue Service using my to jackbooted government thugs. And so if I execute this, will it work? And I say execute, and it says it worked. Let me go back over here. I don't see it right now, but I think if I close it and open it again, edit top, and go down to 16 and look at it, notice that now it has been changed to, the IRS has changed to jackbooted government thugs. They're probably going to come looking for me in a minute. So if I'll stay on air as long as I can. Home. Anyway, so indeed it changed it. It changed the underlying table. So this is the vendor's table, and the view is based on the vendor's table. And when I updated the view, I updated the table that was underneath it. Are we with it there? So what if I changed Fresno View, and I said update Fresno View, and I want to change the city to Frisco, and the state to Texas. So I'm going to move it to Frisco. I say execute. Did it change it? Well, I think we're going to find out that it did. Again, I'm going to close this and re-edit it, edit top 2. And 16 has changed, as we can see, to Frisco, Texas. Jackbooted government thugs in Frisco, Texas. So in fact, when I change things in a view, I change them in the underlying table, subject to certain restrictions. And at this point, I want to go back over to this URL, and the URL is here where I've broken it such that it all fits on one line, and I'm going to go to that now. So this is pretty good when this is the Microsoft.com. So I'm going to go to my, okay, this is it right here. And it tells me, as you go down a little ways, it tells me when the view is updatable. Okay, you can modify the data of an underlying base table through a view subject to the following conditions. Okay, any modifications, those are the only ones I know of, update, insert, delete, must reference columns from only one base table. That means that if you have a table join, you can update it so long as you are only updating columns from one single base table. The best thing to do is not try to update a joined table, but you can if you are referencing, if all of the columns that you are updating, including delete, by the way, must reference columns from only one base table. So I can update a joined table as long as I'm only updating one of the tables. Insert and delete, no can do if it's joined. Just think of it that way. It's got to be a fairly simple table before it works. The columns being modified in the view must directly reference data in the underlying table. What that means is that they cannot be an aggregate function, basically. And they cannot have a group by having distinct, and you cannot have a top clause in there. So basically, you have to have a very simple select statement. So this is a pretty simple select statement. This one would work just fine. I could say select everything. I find it to be better, in my opinion. I think it is better whenever you're using a view just to go ahead, bite the bullet, because you're not going to be doing this very often, and let it spell them all out. Okay. So now I know I can update it. I can delete. If I deleted something, it would be deleted. And then it's done. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh my data. By refreshing the data, I mean I'm going to go back to my create AP, which I do on occasion. So this is the file that, well, come on. Well, I didn't want to do that. Let's see, how do you get rid of that thing? Okay, this is the one, the script that creates the database, or it builds a database. So when I say execute this guy, well, I didn't want to do that. I can't have anything select. I just say execute. Takes him about 5 seconds, and he's now created. So now my database, my data are back to where they were when they were before I made all those changes to it, you know, of jackbooted government thugs, Frisco, Texas. So it's back to IRS in Fresno, California now. So I'm going to refresh the data. If the object ID is not null, drop the view, go, absolutely required. By the way, dropping the view would not have refreshed the data. Now, well, why is this? Well, there's a go. Oh. I got something after it. Okay, it's got to be the only statement in the, so go after it. Now, this one is the same as the one above it, except this one has a slightly different, a slight change. Line 105 I have added. So where the vendor city is Fresno, excuse me, and vendor state is California, CA. And then after that, I have with check option. Okay, this is an important idea. The with check option, and you'll see it used on other stuff too. With check essentially is like it says check the data, make sure everything's cool about it. And when you use it that way with a view, you are saying that make sure that if you update that view, you cannot update it in such a way that the record you are updating or inserting will not appear in the view. Now think about that. I've got a view here that only shows you vendors from Fresno, California. You cannot change data through this view such that the data no longer appear in the view. You can delete it, but you cannot change it. You cannot update the city or the state to something other than Fresno, California, because you would be changing stuff that is not in the view. So you can only act on data that will remain in this view. You cannot insert a record into the view you cannot insert a record using the view that would not be in the view. Okay, now this is a security option. Lots of times you'll use views to enforce security. For example, I've set up a lot of this kind of stuff where we have one table, one for call it personnel, or I guess human resources. Now, and in here we have all of the personnel jackets. Everybody's. They got the college presidents, got everybody's HR documents in there. Now, who can see these documents? Well, anybody that works for human resources that's in the HR department can access these documents, except HR cannot access their own documents. Okay. Usually that falls to finance or something, and finance can't access finance documents. So the idea is that you can't manage your own documents. So I would create two views. One view for HR that shows me all of the human resources personnel jackets for the whole company where the department is not human resources, and another one for finance. So they get a different login and they get to use this view. And we'll see that it's fairly easy to keep to segregate it by users and have one user able to see certain views and one user not able to see it. So this is a pretty simple thing to do. We're going to do a lot more of that in the next class. And so the one for finance shows only HR records. The one that HR gets shows everybody's record except HR. So now finance would manage HR personnel jackets and human resources would manage everybody else's. Therefore, nobody can come in using one of those views and make a change and therefore cause it to modify data outside of the view. Okay, I'm going to create my view, execute, and it created it with the check option. Now, when I go up here and I try to insert it, I'm going to try to insert this record into Fresno View. Now remember, this one does not conform to Fresno View. The city is test and the state is XX. And as soon as I try to insert it, I get it failed because the target view specifies, and here it gives me that, with check option. You don't have to read the whole thing. Basically, it's you violated the check option in that you are trying to insert a record that would not appear in the view. If I change that instead of, if I change the city to Fresno and the state to CA, now it will accept it because now it went ahead and took it. And now it would have allowed me to change the vendor name. So it would accept this. It would let me change the name to Jackbooted Government Thugs. That's fine. But this one, if I tried to change it to Frisco, Texas, this one is going to fail because this one violates the check option. Questions? Views are handy. Views have a little higher overhead at runtime. Well, they have significantly higher runtime overhead than a table. A view is good in that it does not add any storage cost to amount to anything. I guess there's a storage cost of just storing the SQL query, but it's compiled and it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Let's look at one of the problems here. And I'm going to switch back over here, and I believe I've mentioned this once before. I'm going to go to my Object Explorer. And let's see, I want to take a look at the vendors table. Okay, so I'm going to look at the columns of the vendors table. And let's focus on, let's see, invoice total. Invoice total. What is invoice total? Well, it's money. It's an amount of money. But where does it come from? How do I get the invoice total? If I look at it, and I can, come on, edit top 200 rows. So let's look at the invoices. Let's focus right here on number 13, just for the heck of it. And this tells me that we have a vendor ID is 95, invoice number. I'm not guaranteed that the invoice number is unique. I've got a date and an invoice total. Now, where's the invoice total come from? The invoice total is just money. Yeah, it's just a value sitting there, but it comes from someplace, and where it comes from is the invoice line items. So we have invoice line items, and we have an invoice line item amount. Let's go look at the invoice line items. Actually, I meant to look at number 12, but I've got 13 up, so it'll show up just fine for us there. Telephone, line 5, and it is $16.33. Let's see, invoice ID is 13, invoice sequence is 1. The account number is 522, and it's $16.33. Now, I would not have set this up this way, and I'm going to talk more about that in the next class period, but right now let's look at this particular line. And let's go back. I thought I had. Didn't I have one of them? Is it this one? Okay, invoices. Look at invoice 13. Now, notice that this invoice total here is showing $16.34. But if I go over to the invoice line items, it says $16.33. They're off, excuse me, they're off by a penny. Now, if they can be off by a penny, they can be off by $1 million. The bottom line is that what it shows in the invoices table over in invoices is supposed to be the sum of what's in the invoice line items. Are you with me? Invoice total should always reflect the sum of the invoice line item amounts. In most cases, see here's a few of them where we have multiple invoice line items to one invoice ID. And we're going to see that we don't have to do it this way. There's a better way to do it. But this one has 4 invoice line items. 13 just has 1 invoice line item, but it's wrong. It's just wrong. Okay. Let's go back to views. And I'm going to create a view. I'm going to fix this by creating a view. Now, if we were in Access, I could do this at the table level. I can create a derived field in a table. In most databases, you cannot do that. Access will let you get away with it. But every real database, you're going to have to create a view to get around this. So I'm going to create a view. As good practice, I check to see if the view exists. If it does exist, I'm going to drop it, and then I'm going to recreate it. And as I must, I have my go. Create view. Select. Select the usual stuff, except one thing that I'm going to change here. I'm going to select the sum of the invoice line item amount as invoice total, and then the rest of them. I'm going to have to join the invoices, enter join invoice line items on the invoice ID. Since I have an aggregate field, the sum, and something that is not aggregated, remember the rule, I have to group by all of that stuff that's not aggregated. Oh well, kind of a pain in the neck, but I just copy and paste is my friend. So I have this group by there. The nice thing about it is that I can just sit here and run just this piece of it and see it run. Right? Notice that now my invoice total, when I look down here at number 13, it is showing me the correct number there. So the invoice total is $16.33. So I'm not seeing that wrong number. I'm seeing the sum coming from the invoice line item amount from the invoice line items table. You with me on that piece? So I'm fixing a problem here. I named it invoice view. Now the problem is I can't name it invoices, because I've already got something named invoices, but I'm going to give it a different name. Now what I've done is created something that looks like a table. It looks like a table. I've fixed the problem. There's the problem fixed. To you, it looks exactly, the only thing that has changed is the name of the object. Invoices has changed to invoice view. All of the fields in it remained named the same. I even named this field invoice total. And he comes from the table, the underlying table, so he's coming from a execute, and already got one. Well, okay. I didn't drop him. If I dropped him, he would have run. Okay. Now, when I select from him, execute, and I find that if I go down to line 13, that I have fixed that pesky invoice total problem, where from invoices, if I say select from invoices, remember that's $16.33. I'm going to see $16.34 here. $16.34, the invoice total doesn't match the payment total. I can see it this way if I say select everything, if I join the view to the invoices, and by the way, a view can participate in a join, do a left join, and I'm going to say where the invoice total in one of them does not equal the other one. When I execute this, I get the invoice ID of 13. One of them is 34 cents, one of them is 33 cents, and anytime I'm inconsistent like that, I have got a serious problem. If it's possible to be inconsistent, it will be. So what I've done is I've used a view to create something that looks like a table. This will work just like any other table in most of my programs now. One thing that I cannot do, if I am inserting, I cannot insert into the invoice total because that's a sum. So it won't let me insert into that. It will let me insert a record into invoices. It would just have a null invoice total. But I'm not looking at invoice total. If I inserted a record, I would just have null there. And then as I insert invoice line items, it will populate that field for me. Much stronger way to design tables. I use views a lot. And it's something you need. It's I set up my tables. I typically have cryptic names. Lots of times what I will do is I will create a view that just selects all the fields of a table and give it a name, meaning that if I want to change it later, I can change that view without changing the data, and all of my code will still run on it. We'll see more of that. You try to engineer your table names and your view names such that you can make changes like this. I really don't like having to change the name to invoice view instead of invoices because my that could impact some programming that I have on it. Now I could go in and change the name of invoices to old invoices, and then this one could just become invoices. I have to be kind of careful about things like that though, because changing names, particularly names of tables, will tend to break things. So it has to be tested very well. You don't just run in and start slashing at it. Questions? You guys are awful quiet tonight. Anybody out there? Tracy,
hi,
okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So a view can be, so let's just say invoices view can be accessed. If I just write SQL code, SQL code that says use APDB and start naming invoices view as a table, it will know where to find it, or do you have to create the query from within the view?
No, you create the query. You treat the view as if it is a table, because it is in fact a table. You can do anything with a view that you can do with a table in terms of joining it, in terms of subqueries, using it. You just use its name in any query, in any select query, as if it were a table, and it will participate in any query. All the rules for views for tables apply to views also. The only time it gets a little tricky is when you are updating the data using the view. In that case, you want to use a view that's fairly simple. But I can create a view out of any SQL statement. Take the most complicated one we've written, and all you have to do is put create view, give it a name, as, the SQL after it, and it saves that SQL statement in the database. After that, it's just a table to you. And that's the way Access does it all of the time. If you remember Access, when you create a query in Access, you save it and give it a name, so it acts to you like a table. It's really a view. Other questions? Okay. A view is not ordered. This is an important point because why? A table isn't ordered. A view isn't ordered. Now, let's look at this particular one right here. Select top 10 invoice total from invoices, order by invoice total descending. SQL Server will let you create a view on this. So if you say select top 10, if you have the top clause in there, it will let you create the view. Oracle is not so nice, and MySQL won't let you either, but SQL Server would allow me to create a view based on this SQL query right here, create view, top 10, whatever it is, and it would let me have this order by so long as I had the top clause in there. What you will have to do in many places is you will have to hide them down in, so I say select everything from, so this is a derived table, it is, this guy goes in, so I say select top 10 order by, the order by is hidden in the from line, give it a name, and this may or may not be ordered. You will get the same rows, you will get the top 10 rows, but they might not be ordered in the same way. Now, if I go into Oracle, it will let me create the view on this guy because the view, the SQL that I'm using is not ordered. Now, as I pointed out, so this will let me create this, execute, and if I say select everything from, let's see, what was the name of it, order view, I'm going to get the 10 rows that are the top 10. They do happen to be ordered, but in general, you cannot have an order by in the view. Now, if I go over to this page right here, order by clause, select clauses, a view definition cannot include the following. They cannot include an order by clause unless there is also a top clause, and this applies only to SQL Server. You will find it, by the way, the into keyword allows you to take a select query, and when you execute it, you create a table. So if you have the into, so it would be select everything into, and then you give it the name of your new table that you want. and your where clause, you would create a new table that has those data in it, but you cannot use a view to create a table. We didn't talk about that, but sometimes I do. There's just, only so much stuff I can do.
Isn't that condition about the top and the order by also a condition of a subquery? An order by is ignored in the subquery unless the subquery has a top?
Let me think about that. If the subquery is in the where clause, if you have the subquery in the where, then an order by will work on it. If the subquery is in the from line, in other words, it's a derived table, it is essentially a view. Now, as we're going through this, let me relate this back to the subqueries in the from line. It is exactly the same thing if you create a view, then select from the view, then drop the view. Are you with me? So putting a subquery in the from line is the same thing as creating a view that only exists for just a second.
Got it.
And lots of times, if I have something that's really complicated, I will find it to be easier for me to understand what I'm doing if I'll just stop, create the view, and then use the view in my query that I want to get, where I'm actually getting my data. And then later, when I get everything finished up, I might go take that code out of the view and copy it down into the query. Instead of creating the view. It's just the cost of creating a view is so small that you can do it or not. So yes, you are correct. If the subquery is in the from line, then if you have an order by, you also have to have a top.
Wouldn't a view also, like you're saying, instead of subqueries, views would potentially give you a better option than nesting a subquery multiple times, which you might have to do if you had aggregates, too many aggregates that limited the number of columns you can add?
Oh, the number of columns is well up into the thousands.
No, I meant like one of our problems on, I think, Module 8, the greatest difficulty I had in it was pulling out additional columns that I didn't want to group by.
Right. And that's what I was trying to do with that one, was to get rid of that. They could be, for example, you just don't want them in the query. It is considered a mistake if the query returns too much data. So if I'm returning something, if I'm just trying to return something, your birth date or something, I don't want your social security number to appear in there, even though I might have to have it to look up your birth date. I don't want to display your social security number in the output. Or maybe I'm just, getting some aggregates or something, but I want to hide those data. And so I can use a view to do that, where if it's not in the output of the view, you can't get to it. You can't see it because it's compiled and hidden in the database.
Thank you.
Let's see, what else was I? Well, talk the schema binding and all kinds of stuff in here. Main thing I want to talk about was updatable views. I wanted to talk a little bit before we get done here about triggers. That's really a part of the next class. I might kind of lead into them. I want to do it on a day kind of by themselves. I don't want to go here. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Test 2 is open. Test 2 is assigned. Test 2 is due on Saturday. Let's see. It's my job here right now to get all of the stuff caught up. I have, let's see, I say you have 4 hours to submit. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you to do is I want you to sit down and do the test. In other words, don't sit there and take 4 days with the test open. So sit down, do it. If you run over that time a little bit, don't worry too much about it. So I don't want you to hand in the test and say, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to get that last problem. Do the last problem. Okay. Always refresh your tables. This is going to be an important one. So refresh the tables. In other words, before you do the test, run that create AP script that will put all of your tables back and it will update all of your time stamps and everything. It isn't going to make any difference to me because when I run your code, I will run it on a system that is up to date. If your code is not up to date, then you might not see it and you might go, well, why am I getting these weird time? Why am I not getting any data? And I'm trying to find invoices that are due next week or something. But we created that database back in June or whenever we created it. And there aren't any due next week. So they've all gone off. So if you refresh it, now it will have current dates. Makes sense? All test items are equally weighted. And I believe I said, did I say, don't worry about the file names too much. We are very fussy about file names. We are, but if you do a resubmit, it gives it a new name. Did I say here? Okay, test document contains 10 items. You will complete 8 of these. You may choose which 8. If you turn in more than 8, I will grade all of them and base the grade on that number. Each item is worth 12.5% based on completing 8 items. But if you complete 10 items, then each one will be worth 10%. If you get my drift. If you don't tell me, I'm not going to go in and figure out, well, you didn't get that one right, so I'm going to drop that one. I'm not going to just drop 2 of them. You have to tell me which 2 to drop. That's important. So if you don't want to do something, you have to tell me, I'm going to drop this one. So just go in and delete it. But don't answer it and then say, oh, that's wrong. Well, I won't worry about it because I'm going to drop 2. I'm not going to just drop 2 of them. You have to choose them. And it's now 6:50. Questions? Okay. In that case, we will wrap up for tonight, and I will see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good night, all. At least I remembered to turn on the recording. Okay, stopping recording.